Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Divorce Coaching Podcast with myself, Tom Nash, Mr. Divorce Coach, and my illustrious colleague, Fay I from Feel Positive Coaching. We have another really interesting and very exciting guest for you today. I got to meet this very lovely lady a few months back at an event, and I've also since seen her speak several times before. We have us today Dr. Supriya McKenna, a GP turned coach, mentor, author, published author as well, I might add, and one of the UK's prominent specialists in narcissistic personality disorders. She works with obviously a number of couples who are going through divorce or separation, but also those who are maybe trying to figure out if their partner or themselves, I suppose, maybe are showing these traits or experiences. So you can find Dr. Supriya through thelifedoctor.org. We'll be sharing her contact information at the end of the video and on socials. But welcome today. Hello, Dr. Supriya. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very, very well. Not as warm as we have been when recording these, so I've got the fan off and hopefully I'm not going to sit here pouring whilst we're recording today. But Faye, this was one that you and I spoke about 6 months ago, about we need to get someone on to talk about NPD because it's everywhere at the moment, whatever form of social media you're on, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. When it comes to the situation of divorce, separation, relationship breakup, co-parenting, all that stuff that we focus on, the phrase of narcissist and NPD is everywhere, isn't it? So this is one that we said we really wanted to get to.
Definitely, it's very much a hot topic at the moment, and I don't want to frighten you, Dr. Supriya, but me and Tom have got so many questions. They're tripping off our tongue, so we want to educate people that are listening, people that maybe in a relationship or married to a narcissist, somebody who may be going through the separation divorce process, people that are healing from the trauma of narcissistic abuse. We want to quash some myths, get right into the heart of what it means, what can happen, and what people can do that are listening as well. So hopefully, all the listeners are going to come away with something that they have learned and that they're going to carry forward. So thank you so much for joining us. I can't tell you how excited I am about this one.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So shall we kick off with the kind of obvious then of what is narcissistic personality disorder, or someone that is a narcissist, and how do you really define it and understand what it is and what it looks like? How do you spot it really?
Yeah, well, I think that, so you've got the crux of it there, because most people use the word narcissist as a kind of descriptive word to mean someone who's a bit mean or a bit vain or a bit selfish, or someone who drives a sports car, a flashy kind of car, or is prominent on social media, taking loads and loads of selfies, that kind of thing. So that's the word, that's the way that people are using that word now, and I think that might be why it's so common, so commonly used, because it's kind of come into our vocabulary as meaning just that. But you're right, because actually the word narcissist or the word narcissism actually means someone who's got narcissistic personality disorder, and that is a real diagnosable entity. And so that's really important to know. We're not talking about it, or I don't talk about it in the context of it just meaning someone who's a bit selfish or all the other things that I said. It's a specific diagnosable personality disorder. And so you asked me what it is. Well, there's actually a very there's quite a long description of what it is in the diagnostic textbook that certainly the American diagnostic textbook that professionals use to make the diagnosis. And that's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. So there's a long description, but I mean, it's far too complicated to get into here. So I think the key points really are that narcissistic personality disorder is a condition where someone's got low empathy, a sense of entitlement, and an addiction to feeling special. And crucially, all those three things happen at the expense of other people. So that's kind of what it is in a nutshell. But it's really important to understand that underneath the behaviors, the person actually has very, very low self-esteem. So a narcissist has intrinsically low self-esteem, and that's kind of where all of this comes from. That's not to say, oh, that's a shame, let's just allow the narcissist to be abusive, and because their behaviors are abusive, and make no mistake about that. But it comes from intrinsic low self-esteem, but it doesn't look like it. So really important to say that what the narcissist does is they project an image which is very different to how they feel underneath. So it can be quite a grandiose image, or it can be they're quite superior or quite haughty or quite arrogant. It might not be like that, but that's what we generally think of when we think of a narcissist. Perhaps we'll talk about the 4 different types later on. But they put this false persona, as it's known, out to the world, and they need other people to validate it. So they need other people to believe in it so that they can believe in it. And that's really important. They need external validation from other people so that they can believe in their own false persona, specifically so they don't have to feel their own feelings of inadequacy and shame and worthlessness and low self-esteem. So that's what it is. That's, it's a very specific thing. It's very different to just being vain or selfish or mean, as you can see from that. So
that's good. Oh, sorry, Tom, you carry on.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, someone who does suffer from NPD, would they show those traits that you've just mentioned in every avenue of their life, or would it just be with their partner, their boss, their employees, their neighbor, or would it be with everybody?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because that's actually probably, you're very good at getting to the heart of the matter. I've noticed already.
We've got 45 minutes, so
yes. So yeah, that's exactly it. It's pervasive. In fact, in the DSM, which is that textbook I mentioned before, that's the first word that's mentioned. It's pervasive. In other words, it occurs throughout all different aspects of their lives. But the thing is, if you imagine a narcissist as like a sun, and you imagine all the planets kind of orbiting the sun, and they're in different orbits. You've got one really in a close orbit. That would probably be the primary partner. There could be another partner in that same orbit, but they don't know about each other. And then you've got an orbit further out. So that could be maybe the parent or the child or the friends. And then perhaps an orbit further out. That could be the work colleagues, perhaps. And then in the last orbit, just kind of casual acquaintances, the builder, the postman, the girl in the shop. And so the closer you are to a narcissist, to the sun, to this narcissist who's the sun, the more you're going to feel the heat, basically. Yeah. So, that's key. So these people that are in the further orbits, they don't feel it quite as much. So they're less likely to know that they're actually, they're not going to be subjected to the behaviors as frequently and as intensely as the other people. But the narcissist can pull people into closer orbits at any time as well, and that's when you're more likely to feel the heat. So yeah, they actually abuse everybody. They act in these ways towards everybody, but it's much more subtle and much less frequent the further out your orbit is, which is why it's pretty hard to spot if you're not directly involved with one.
Yeah. I love that analogy. That was so much easier to understand.
it was brilliant. And I wanted to ask you, just on the back of that, something that sprung to mind with a covert narcissist. I've heard that the narcissist can wear a mask for years.
Oh yeah.
And then be the epitome of the brilliant family person, whether that's a husband or a wife, be amazing to everyone. But when that mask slips, and it can take years, there is utter devastation and carnage.
Yeah, well, so people get kind of slightly confused with what a covert narcissist is. And a covert narcissist is also, there's a few names. So there's a covert narcissist, the closet narcissist, vulnerable narcissist, and these are the 3 different 3 things for the same thing. So that's one of the 4 types of narcissists that perhaps we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, all narcissistic abuse actually is relatively covert. People get confused with that because regardless of the type, it's actually covert. It's covert psychological and emotional abuse. So pretty much all narcissistic abuse starts out quite covertly. They don't go, I'm going to abuse you. They do it very, very subtly to start with. So it's all covert. And yes, it can take decades. Very often it does take decades for people to actually work out what's been going on, or for the mask to drop, as you said. But one of the hardest types to spot is that covert or closet vulnerable narcissist. But the reason for that is actually because they don't. The other types of narcissists can look like they think they're quite special. The covert narcissist doesn't want to look like they think they're quite special. So they attach themselves to someone who they believe looks like they're quite special. So they bask in the reflected specialness of the other person because they're too scared to actually chase that, the adoration directly, if you see what I mean. So that's what a real covert narcissist is, or closet narcissist.
That's brilliant. With you mentioning the DSM-5 and all of the traits, how many have to be ticked off for someone to actually get a diagnosis? I imagine it's not all of them because it's so broad.
Yeah, so it's 5 out of 9 in the DSM. Yeah, but the DSM, I mean, it's good, but if you're in the situation and you're trying to sort of look at it objectively, you know, your head's spinning, looking at all these things, thinking, well, are they, aren't they? Well, I don't know. There are easier ways actually to sort of spot a narcissist. There are better things to look out for than the way that it's put in the textbook, if you see what I mean.
And I suppose a lot of narcissists throughout the world wouldn't even have been tested because the majority, I imagine, of narcissists think, well, I'm not a narcissist, so I don't need to get help.
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of narcissists, probably over 95%, have no idea that they're a narcissist. But also, and this is really important to understand, even if they do have some concept that they're a narcissist, basically it suits them to be narcissistic. Because part of narcissism is exploiting others. As I said before, they've got a sense of entitlement and they exploit other people, and they've got low empathy, which means that they basically exploit other people for their own benefit. So it suits them to be narcissistic. So a narcissist isn't going to go, oh no, I'm a narcissist, I better change. You know, and there've been studies on this, and actually grandiose narcissists, or also known as overt narcissists or exhibitionist narcissists. That's another one of the groups that's out of the 4, but they actually have been shown to be happier than most people because it suits them to be narcissistic. They get what they want from being a narcissist. So no, they're not going to get diagnosed. I mean, why on earth would you go and say, please diagnose me? You're not going to change anyway, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, when I first kind of came across the terminology being utilised a lot within our kind of sphere, let's say in the divorce separation world, and how it gets used quite a lot. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but for me, that was one of the things that made me go, well, sometimes I have that, sometimes I'm that. Oh no, am I that one? Oh, yeah. And I was starting to kind of go, is this me? Because I don't think I do this all the time, but actually I can see pockets where actually I do get angry, or I don't see their point of view, or whatever it might be. Yeah. And I'm starting to think, oh my gosh, I'm in that camp. So with that, just having that thought of realization, going, oh my god, am I one of them? Does that actually do the opposite? Because I would go and seek help. I had counselling years ago and things like that. I do what I do as a coach to help others. So there, I was then starting to think, oh, maybe I'm not. It's confusing. It's still a minefield.
Generally speaking, most people, I get so many well, I don't get the couples, I only ever get the non-narcissistic person, or sometimes I get the narcissist who's projecting their narcissism onto their spouse, but you know, that's another story completely. But yeah, it's very common for people to go, I think I might be the narcissist, and there's a reason for that, and that's the spectrum of narcissism. So everybody has narcissistic traits to a degree. And that's really important to understand. So if you imagine a spectrum, a scale of 1 to 10, you want to be in the middle of that scale. You want to be at 4, 5, or 6. So you want to basically be able to exert your boundaries, stand up for yourself, know what your needs are. And you know, it's about being able to sort of have a healthy sense of self-advocacy, you know, being able to put what you need forwards and just being very, very kind of clear on that and boundaried. So having the right amount of selfishness, really. Yeah. But that has to be balanced with empathy. So if you've still got empathy, that's what happens when you're at that 4, 5, or 6, that healthy place where you want to be on the spectrum. But as you go up the spectrum to the 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s, you progressively lose empathy. And you become more and more narcissistic, and you exploit other people more and more as you go up that scale. So the 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s are becoming increasingly narcissistic and pathologically so. So 10 is Donald Trump.
You know what, that's the name I had in my head, because I was sitting here thinking, so I mean, I can't remember where I heard it, but years and years ago, early days of being in business, that I'd heard some phrase about the fine line between like the world's business owners and elites, like the Jeff Bezos, etc., and psychopaths type sort of thing, or whatever it might be. And I was wondering, Donald Trump was the first person I had in mind, but people like those do it at all costs to win type personalities that have been, not necessarily Richard Branson's or whatever, but those people in that sphere, Elon Musk's, etc. Are they higher on the spectrum?
Definitely.
Yeah. I wonder if they'll watch this and comment.
Yeah.
Maybe we might get lots of comments when we put this out, and that kind of leads me on, actually, Supriya, is actually that nature nurture debate. Unlike psychopaths that I've read are born that way. You know, are narcissists born that way, or are they become that way through parenting, abuse, narcissistic parents? Where do you sit there? What is the truth for people who are listening and watching?
Yeah, because people often say, oh, what's the difference between a psychopath and a narcissist? And that's like that's a can of worms, and no one actually fully agreed on it. But one of the differences that people do think is relevant is that, yeah, narcissists are largely made rather than being born. Psychopaths tend to be born. So there's warrior genes that have been identified in psychopaths. But there have also been some really interesting twin studies that have been done, you know, where twins are separated at birth.
Yeah.
And they've looked at narcissism in those, and they've just determined that actually there is a genetic link as well. So it seems to be that with narcissism, it's a little bit of, it can be a bit of genes, but it's largely the nurture side of things. So it's largely their environment and how they were brought up. But there can be a genetic component as well, but it's not anywhere near as relevant as with psychopaths.
I mean, that's fascinating. So are we saying that actually narcissists can come down the scale?
Yes, they can.
And come down.
They can come down the scale, but only if you imagine that scale again, they can come down by a notch, basically. They can't come down more than a notch. And if they're too high up the scale, like if they're a 10 or a 9, or, you know, an 8 might come down to a 7, maybe. A 7 could probably maybe come into the normal range at a 6. But, you know, really only a notch. But that's again so important, because, you know, obviously we're talking about divorce here, and people turn up and they go, I think my husband or I think my wife is a narcissist. And it's just, you know, going back to that scale, it could just be that because they're going through a really awful time. I mean, any type of loss can make you more narcissistic. The loss of health, the loss of a loved one, divorce being at that whole grief process itself, it can make you more selfish. It can make you less empathic, but temporarily so. So it could just be that, you know, someone who was a 6 on the spectrum has slid up to a 7 temporarily, but they're not actually a true narcissist in the sense of having narcissistic personality disorder. And when things get better, they'll slide back down to the 6. So that's kind of really important to know, because I think a lot of people are turning up and going, these are awful, or she's awful. They're doing this, that, and the other, and they're a narcissist. And it could just be that they've actually just temporarily slid up that scale.
So time for me to play my anarchist hat and ruffle feathers for any viewers or listeners. I have an opinion on this, personal one. But so what's your view on, do you think the terminology of, less so NPD, because most people don't tend to say NPD, like you said, they say my ex is a narcissist or is narcissism. Do you think the terminology is being overly used and is having an impact in actually diluting the severity of the real experiences for people who have been through it, like you, Fay, etc., that are really in quite a scary place and are really suffering, when actually, like you say, it's actually just that their ex or their partner in the sphere of divorce and separation is probably not showing much empathy because they're still angry, or they're upset, or they're hurt, or they're going through the child arrangement hearings and whatever it might be for them that's impacting them in different ways. So do you think it's a phrase and terminology that's being overly used and is impacting the severity?
Definitely. It's because it's become a buzzword. People are using it. People kind of, you know, people like to hang their hook on something, that their hat on a hook, don't they? And it's easier. It makes you feel better to do so sometimes. And I think a lot of people are incorrectly doing that. So, yeah, I mean, you know, I talk to divorce lawyers all the time, and they tell me that it is the word. It's, the common thing is, if I had £1 for every time someone told me that their spouse is a narcissist, you know, I'd be living on a private island, sort of thing. Yeah. So, that's kind of what lawyers will say to me. And it's been the last 18 months to 2 years that people have been saying that. So it is that buzzword. And apparently 4 years ago, it was control. Sorry?
About 5-10 years ago, it was parental alienation that was being used a lot.
Yep, and that's a whole other issue. It's all kicking off with
we're doing another one on that, don't worry.
with that.
So is that also like from a societal change and shift, like you say, the last 18 months or so, or is it impact of social media? I mean, I'm not saying that you have all the data on this, but I mean, as an opinion piece, do you think that is just that changes of how we voice our own experiences and on our own platforms for our 10 seconds of fame or our living our best life type thing? Do you think those are impacts to it as well?
I mean, you know, if you ask me whether I think it's increasing, because that might be what's happening here, you know, that people are talking about it because it's increasing, or it might be they're just becoming more aware of it, or they might be using it incorrectly. So I think those are the three things. Social media, my own opinion is there isn't enough data on it actually to know whether it's increasing or not, but social media makes it look like it's increasing because of course that's it's so visible on social media. You know, is social media making people more narcissistic? I don't know. But what I do know is that it's a fantastic place for narcissists to play. I mean, what an amazing thing. You create this false persona. That's what they do anyway. So it's mirrored beautifully online. You create a false persona, you know, you post carefully curated images of yourself, you know, and then you wait for the external validation to come in. So that's likes and comments, and then you comment in response to a comment, and you get some more likes, and, you know, oh, you know, you're looking fantastic, hun, you know, and all of that stuff. And it's wonderful for a narcissist. So they play in that space. It's just a fantastic way for them to get narcissistic supply. That's that external validation I was talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I don't know if it's actually increasing, but I certainly think you see it a lot more. And I think that's probably why people use the terminology more. Plus, of course, you know, I mentioned Donald Trump earlier, but he's the poster boy for narcissism. And, you know, if anyone's been sort of keeping up with any kind of type of US politics, you know, the word narcissism was thrown at him innumerable times. So, you know, yeah, I think that it's become a word that we've heard because of Mr. Trump as well. I do think that's got something to do with it.
One last question I was going to ask you. Well, I've got more, but I'm going to let Fay have a turn just after this one. Only because it's in this similar thread that we're talking about the kind of numbers game essentially. But is there a rough kind of percentage, or one in every X amount is a true sufferer of NPD?
Yeah, now again, figures massively vary. Most of the data comes from the States. So some studies show that it's as small as 0.5%. Seems that's, you know, not very many studies show that. Some show as high as 6.2%. The majority seem to be around the kind of 1% to sort of 3%, maybe 4% kind of level. Some people say 5%. So it's commonly quoted that it's 5%, 1 in 20. Whether that's true or not, whether that's a bit high, I mean, we need to do a lot more studies on this, but certainly I would say it's between 1 and 5%, you know, definitely. So
I suppose also, whether it's between that 1 and 5%, you would then also have the 4 different types and different scales. So again, it might not be that the 5% are all operating at a 10 in a particular one of the 4 categories as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why it's so difficult, because I think people have historically only recognized the grandiose or the exhibitionist type, which is that type that, you know, the type that kind of they walk into a room and everybody kind of looks, and they're haughty and they're arrogant and they've got masses of charisma, but they're sort of they're quite vain usually, that's the type that you normally think of as being the grandiose type. But as we've talked about the other types, and I should probably mention that the other 3 are there's the devaluing narcissist. That's the type which puts people down. Donald Trump is wonderful example of this. So the devaluing narcissist puts other people down in order to inflate their own ego and their own sense of self-worth. So it's that comparative thing. That's a really big part of it. So all narcissists actually devalue other people. They all do it, but the devaluing narcissist does it massively. So they're always putting other people down. They're always criticizing other people. They're always calling them names. And it's in order to inflate their own ego. So that's one to look out for. The closet narcissist or the covert narcissist, as we've already talked about, they're the sort that, just to recap, they don't seek the limelight openly, but they get their sense, you know, that addiction to feeling special that I was talking about. They get their sense of feeling special by attaching themselves to a person that they consider to be special, so that they bask in the reflected glow of that person, and other people think, oh, you must be special because you're with this person, and they put that person on a pedestal. Inevitably that person's going to fall off that pedestal, and then they tend to get depression and anxiety because they're kind of attaching their own self-esteem to someone else, which is obviously, you know, not a great place to be, in terms of, you know, trying to keep be stable and secure.
That would have been the vice president then.
Yes, quite possibly. And then the other, well, that might maybe Melina, I'm thinking. Is that her name? Her name? Melania. That's it. Maybe she's I mean, I'm completely hypothesizing now. So, but yes, quite possibly. Or Ivanka. No, Ivana. Ivana was the wife, wasn't she? Originally. Ivana Trump.
That's the daughter.
Hair.
That's the daughter.
No, I think Ivanka's the daughter and Ivana was the wife.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah. So Ivana, I think she could, yeah.
When I post this, I'm going to hashtag Trump because. And then you've got the last one.
For the final type is the altruistic narcissist, or the communal narcissist. That's the other name for them. And they get their sense of specialness by being the most charitable or the most generous or the most kind. They need to be seen as being the most of those things in order to get their sense of specialness. So you see them in kind of, they'll be campaigners, or they'll be on committees, or, in religious groups. There's all sorts of ways of being an altruistic narcissist, but that's not one that people think of. I mean, they can be yoga teachers, they can be meditation teachers, they can be just all sorts of things.
Podcast hosts.
So those are the four types, and it's those other two. It's the closets and the altruistic narcissists that people really don't see. They don't recognize them, and those are the ones where decades can pass before they realize why am I feeling this way? Why do they do this behind closed doors? It takes a long time to realize what you've actually been dealing with.
Yeah. Go on then, Faye.
Oh, thank you.
Floor is yours.
I'm just sitting back and listening because it's fascinating. I wanted to kind of talk a bit more about people that are suffering from narcissistic abuse. And I wanted to ask you, Supriya, have you seen more people accessing help over the past few years? And do you think this is because people are more aware of it? People are more brave about getting help for that? Because, my personal opinion of people suffering from the trauma from narcissistic abuse, it's very misunderstood. And very little people know, like any sort of abuse, what you're going through unless you've been through it. And I just wanted to hear your opinion on it. Is there more people coming forward to access help? Yeah, I think so. Definitely. And so that's the kind of flip side of using narcissism as a buzzword. If somebody actually looks it up and goes, oh my gosh, this is actually happening to me. This is exactly what it is. And that happens a lot. It's definitely, more and more. And 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there was basically nothing. There was no help. It just wasn't understood at all. But now people really do, people have heard it, and they do, you do recognize it when you read about it, if you actually have been in a situation. So lots more people coming forward. Yeah, and I suppose for some people reading things, it can be that light bulb moment to think, this is why I feel the way I do. Yeah, this is why this has happened. So it can be a big moment for people, and people actually stuck in the trauma of it. Healing isn't easy. Healing is never linear. And I wanted to ask you, we talk about trauma bonds and narcissistic triangles and everything else that comes with healing. Some people, I've read that some people call it the loss of soul. Some people even call it's like the rape of the soul. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that. Yeah, soul rape. Yeah. Actually, I even mentioned that in the book because I think most people would agree. In fact, that's almost the sort of defining characteristic. And I'm glad you mentioned it, because it isn't on my list of defining characteristics, but it is almost a defining characteristic, because people do say that it felt like soul rape. It's kind of like, it's because your boundaries have been violated on every level. And you've become a kind of shadow of your former self. Everything that the narcissists claim to be attracted to, about you in the first place, all your qualities, they then devalued and made you feel as if you didn't, you weren't that you were the opposite of that. So you sort of, that's what gaslighting is. It's where you're when you're love bombing.
I've heard about that, where they're love bombing to build you up so they can specifically knock you back down, to devalue
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Well, they point out your qualities, etc., in the love bombing phase, and they play to them, and they say that they're exactly the same as you, and you want the same things, and you feel like you've met your soulmate. That's another really important thing, that people think they've met their soulmate. They've been love bombed. It's not just a sort of slow progression of a relationship. It's bam. It's always proceed. The relationship always starts with love bombing, if it's a real narcissistic relationship. So that's a very important one to look out for. But yeah, eventually then they'll start to devalue. So there's a cycle, and this is crucial as well. With real narcissism, it starts with love bombing, and then it goes into a cycle of devaluation. So it's the idealized devalue cycle. First, they tell you how great you are, you're wonderful, you can do no wrong, and then they'll start to devalue you. So they'll start subtly with a little put down that maybe disguised as a joke, and as the recipient, your heart sinks, and you think, oh, I must try harder, I must do better, I must lose weight, I must do whatever it is. You go to the gym, whatever your particular vulnerability is, they hone in on it. They devalue you about it. You feel bad. You start trying to jump through hoops to please the narcissist. And then before you know it, you're back in the love bombing idealization phase. So you think, oh, everything's okay, and that was just a blip. They were tired, they were hungry, you're having a bad time at work. You make excuses for them. You're back in this wonderful sort of, amazing phase again. And then again, sure enough, you're devalued again. And the devaluations get bigger and bigger and bigger as time goes on. And it's not a sort of continuous cycle. It's not it is a continuous cycle, but it's not a predictable cycle. It's not like, oh, every 3 weeks I'm going to be devalued. It's a sort of, it's unpredictable. So the length of the cycles are unpredictable, and the size of the devaluations are unpredictable as well. So they can be really massive or they can be really small. And that's what makes it addictive, because that's having an effect on your brain chemicals. Just like if you're playing a slot machine, for example, if you're a gambler and you're playing a slot machine, you have a little win, you think, oh, brilliant, I'll stay in the game. And then you lose loads, you think, oh dear, but I'm just going to try and get it back. And so you play again, you have a massive win, you're properly back in the game. And then tiny little, losses. So it's the kind of, and it mucks about your brain chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, noradrenaline, and it causes you to become addicted. If anyone's ever sort of done anything like that, played on a slot machine, they'll understand just how addictive they are. And that's why it's the varying nature of the cycles and the unpredictability of the sizes of the wins and the losses, just like with narcissistic abuse.
So you can see why they call it the loss of the soul and soul rape. And I imagine when you're in the trauma bonds, I think the definition of a trauma bond is loving someone who destroys you from the inside out, or something like that. You can totally get where they're coming from. I think for someone to actually admit to being a sufferer of narcissistic abuse, it's a big step for them, isn't it?
Yeah.
For them to say, this is me, this is what I'm suffering from. I think so many people hide for many years behind it, like say, waiting for things to pass and things being good again, and then other things happening. Yeah. For someone to access your help, Dr. Supirya, they must be extremely, extremely brave.
Yeah, well, I think it's taken, I tend to get a lot of people who come forward during the divorce process. So the narcissist at that point has ramped up their abusive behaviors to, a level, I don't know, off the scale kind of level of horrendousness. It's intolerable levels. They want everything. They want the house. They want you to pay the mortgage on the house, and they want to live there bill free forever. They want the children to live with them permanently all of the time, and for you to never see them again. They want the cars. They want it all. They've got that sense of entitlement. They want you to have nothing, and they want to annihilate you. That's really important. If you are divorcing a narcissist, you will get the sense that they are trying to annihilate you, and annihilate you spiritually, physically, emotionally, psychologically. That's soul rape right there. They're trying to just take you down, and drive you to suicide. A real narcissist makes you feel like you're being driven to suicide.
Yeah, I've heard that so many times, and that kind of leads me on to the next question is, when you're divorcing or separating from a true narcissist, I imagine it's so important to have very firm and structured boundaries when you're dealing with this type of person.
Yeah, I mean, so part of the problem is with narcissism is that narcissists will go over your boundaries, they just completely ignore them all the time, and you've allowed that. I mean, that's a very prominent part of narcissistic abuse as well, is that, you know, they've kind of edged over a boundary and you've gone, oh, all right then, you know, and then they've edged over another boundary and you've set yourself up for this. Unfortunately, most people who've been the victims of narcissistic abuse will admit they've got poor boundaries, or perhaps they don't even know what a boundary is, you know, or they don't know what their needs are. They've never even thought about that. You know, what are my needs? What do I like? What are my preferences? They have no idea. Because everything has been about the narcissist. Everything has been about revolving around the narcissist. So yeah, boundaries are just really important, because you're sort of saying, you know, you're drawing a line in the sand, aren't you, really? And you're sort of saying, you know, it starts here, that my boundaries are now immovable. And, you know, the narcissist has got to know that you're not going to budge. They're not going to be able to play that game with you where you'll just give in. But they'll try everything they can. They'll scare you, they'll threaten you, they'll use the children as weapons of abuse against you, they'll use the legal system, of course, as weapons of abuse, they'll financially try to obliterate you using the legal system. So it's very hard to keep your boundaries in place, because it sort of wears you down, and this constant pushing of the boundaries. But you know, it's not easy at all.
So what advice would you have for anyone that's listening to this, or indeed watching it, and feels that actually that it's not just, as we said earlier, it's not just that it's due to the situation, actually this is potentially their former partner. What advice would you give to someone in those earlier stages or those earlier days of the separation?
I think the first thing is, you're not going to be able to heal unless you really reduce contact. So, and also you've got to stop giving the narcissist that external validation that they require. So the narcissist, part of the reason why the narcissist is keeping you in play and keeping it and behaving the way that they're behaving so badly towards you in divorce and separation is because they need you, because you are their primary source of narcissistic supply. That's that external validation that I was talking about. They need that. They need to get that, and they get it from people: adoration, attention, drama, conflict, and causing you to feel fear. So they get that hit of external validation. It doesn't have to be positive, it doesn't have to be attention or adoration. The drama, the conflict, and the fear are really major players. So you need to not give them that, basically. So you need to really cut down contact to the absolute bare minimum. If you don't have children with a narcissist, and if you don't work with the narcissist, go no contact, completely no contact. But if you'll have to use other methods if you had children with a narcissist, say, or if you work with them. And there's a great technique called the grey rock technique, which I'm sure you've heard of, which is where you're minimizing the sort of narcissistic supply that you give to a narcissist. It sounds really odd when I describe it, but it works like a charm. I mean, it just is the best thing. And you have to, if you have to see the narcissist, you basically have to be as boring to them as a grey rock. So a really boring, uninteresting piece of rock. So you don't make eye contact with them. You speak in a sort of flat monotone, using as few words as possible. You just try to keep, you don't rise to any of their baits, because they will be constantly trying to get you to rise to baits so that they can, you can create more drama and more back and forth conversation. So, you basically just answer with yeses and nos. Anything more than a yes or a no, you've gone too far. That's a whole sentence. A whole sentence is too much. Don't look at them. Don't look them in the eye. Don't show any emotion on your face. Don't raise your eyebrows or roll your eyes or any of that. You've just got to be completely expressionless, and basically become incredibly boring to them. And they need narcissistic supply. So what they'll do is they'll ramp it up. They'll really try and push your buttons once you start doing it. So you've got to stay firm, and eventually, remarkably quickly, probably in a matter of days or weeks, they will have to go somewhere else for their narcissistic supply. And they'll leave you to a large degree, they'll leave you alone. That's so important. So the grey rock technique, look it up. It's well worth employing that in the early days of separation, and throughout your post-separation divorce and post-divorce relationship with a narcissist. It's really important to do that. And the same goes to communicating with them. They'll be bombarding you with ranting, accusatory emails and texts and WhatsApps, you know, on every possible platform. Your phone will be pinging and you'll be responding angrily or trying to, you know, they'll be accusing you of things that you haven't done, and you'll be trying to clear your name thinking, this is going to go to court and a judge is going to think that I'm an alcoholic or a prostitute or a child abuser or whatever they're accusing you of. So you need, or whatever, they'll also use blackmail. For example, they'll threaten to maybe expose your family members or your friends for things that they've done. You know, they'll just use every conceivable way to rope you into communicating with them. And so again, you've got to kind of do the grey rock technique, but in the written form with that. So block them from everything bar one form of communication, preferably email, so that you don't find yourself tempted to respond instantly. Even better than that is Our Family Wizard, which is a parenting app that I'm sure you do recommend yourselves. And that keeps things, everything is court admissible there, so that's quite important. So that's probably the preferable thing, but if you don't want to do Our Family Wizard, then email is the best thing. But those are really important points. You know, you want to be withdrawing narcissistic supply. That will make an enormous difference to how things play out.
Cool. Well, you've answered all of my questions. I'm not sure if Fay has any more.
I could have lots more, but I suppose I want you to either say yes or expel a myth that I have got about narcissists and narcissistic personality disorder. Do the majority of narcissists, whether men or women, and let's not forget women as well, you know, there's lots of women narcissists out there, are the majority of them sexually promiscuous? Have they got lots of people giving them the supply so that if one person drops off, they haven't got to go and find somebody else? Or is that a complete myth?
I don't think that's a complete myth. I think it's true of certain types, sort of the grandiose types. There's very often, you know, I mentioned those orbits, and very often in the second orbit, there's a bunch of people who are waiting in the wings. So they think they've got a chance, and they're sort of wait, you know, they'll wait for years. So, you know, there's usually quite a few of those. They, you know, in terms of whether they're actually promiscuous, some are and some aren't. You know, definitely, I think there's a higher rate of it amongst narcissists than in the general population. And, you know, you mentioned really importantly that it's not just men. That's really, really important. You know, with the altruistic narcissists and the communal narcissist, the covert or closet narcissists, it's 50-50, they think. You know, again, more research needs to be done, but it's thought that it's 50-50. It's more the grandiose type, the you know, the very overt, obvious type. It's more socially acceptable for men to be like that in society. So that's why they tend to be a bit more like that, whereas the women tend to go more to the covert side. So, you know, it really is. This isn't a gendered issue at all. And it's so important for people to realize that. I know tons of narcissistic females, tons, you know, and people they get away with it, I think, for longer because they're female.
Yeah.
So have you got any questions for myself or for Fay?
I'm just wondering what you say to people when they come to you and sort of say, oh, I think my spouse is a narcissist. What do you do? What's, you know?
I'll let you go first, Fay, because I know it's an area of your...
Yeah, and of course we both hear that a lot because we've talked about this buzzword, and I think it is just getting to know as a coach and getting to know that the signs, you know, narcissistic abuse, you know, someone who's suffering from that, I can sense that very easily. So people who are just coming in and they're saying, you know, I'm maybe a bit depressed, I'm a bit anxious, my ex is a narcissist, you're thinking, oh, maybe there needs to be more. So, you know, there's a bit of questioning, delving. And I think as you go through the process with them of what they've come to you for, I mean, you know, one of my specialities is healing from trauma. So I can generally sense quite quickly whether this person is really suffering from MPD abuse or not. So I think you have to be quite knowledgeable about it beforehand. I mean, Tom, I don't know whether you go with your gut, whether it's experience, whether it's a question and tick list kind of thing, or...
Yeah, I think all three of us being coaches, we are all well versed and well trained in how we read people, how we decipher all of their communication strategies and how they come across, and then also the patterns as well. And like you say, when you're building that true and deep rapport with someone, and you're starting to really help shift that perspective. I mean, I've had clients come to me who have said that they believe they're exes, or they have even been told that they are. And then we're working through the process, and actually, like, when you really get to know them and see how they're being impacted, actually that's not the case at all. Likewise, there have been people where actually I have genuinely felt quite early on, even in just in a discovery call, that I'm a box ticking exercise, that they're trying to prove that they are not by coming and seeking the support and advice, but then they very quickly disappear off the radar. And they don't see out the process, and they don't work on the deeper rooted issues of their experiences, and why they're having and reacting to certain emotive situations, because they're not dealing with the grassroots situations from adolescence and all the things that have gone through in their childhood, etc. And I suppose for me that is a bit of an experience thing as well, but I think that's just something that also comes with time, is that you do get to spot. And doing things like this as well is always really helpful. That I am yet to do one of these recordings, haven't we, Faye, where I don't take away something, usually quite a lot, to go back and be like, right, I can now add that, and I can spot that, or I can work with that, and I can help people through with that as well. So yeah, I think it is a lot around how we all read people, how we understand them, and how we see changes and shifts in them, because obviously a lot of the work that I know I do is helping people change and shift that perspective, and how they can form a new alliance, especially for parents, co-parenting, because I deal with a lot of people that are, let's say, in the thick of it or post divorce or separation. So it's also then how do they move forward, and help them rebuild those communication gaps and things like that. So quite early on, it's quite easy to tell if they or their partner are showing these traits. But again, also how it's coming across all the time. So if I've got someone where I'm working with a client who's referred to me by a solicitor, but likewise they're not love bombing and devaluing both me and their solicitor and their ex and so on and so forth. Again, it's a combination of all of those things. That's how I feel, and what my experience is. Hopefully that's right, Dr.
Yeah, I think it is a combination, isn't it? It's a combination of all those things, of the box ticking exercise and the intuition on some level as well, and just being able to read people. And as you say, so you have to have an open mind, and sometimes it occurs to you over time. I mean, you can spend a few sessions with someone and then think, oh gosh, this is actually the narcissist in this relationship, not the person that they're saying, they're the person on the other side. But I was really interested, Faye, with what you were saying about trauma and dealing with trauma. What do you do? What specifically do you do in terms of trauma?
So many people that come to me, like you say, that are suicidal, that don't know who they are, that can't make even decisions, simple decisions. And this is obviously what narcissistic abuse is. The feeling clouded, the feeling out of their body is so common, not feeling that you're even in your body, because you don't know where that is, you don't know how to be. You don't know how to function as a normal human being. So when I've got someone that comes to me presenting like that, because I'm more holistic, I work with them on things that are going to ground them, to allow them to come back into their body, like breathing techniques, yoga. I can't go on, Tom knows, I just talk about yoga all the time. It allows people to connect with their breath and be in their body, getting out in nature. So many things that I will do with people to help them find who they are again, because I think a lot of people suffering don't know who they are. They don't know where to begin. They don't know how to cut those trauma bonds, because in their mind they still love that person, even though that person has treated them very badly. So it is a very very small steps, and sometimes the people don't even realize until you kind of suggest it to them, and then it comes as a big shock. So I think you have to work with the client at their own pace of what they are happy with and how they feel safe, because as you would know, Supirya, a lot of people, they don't feel safe. They're in that fight or flight or hypervigilant mode. And it's just helping them to ground. So that's one of the main things I do, using lots of different techniques. Even, things like EFT. I'm just becoming a practitioner now that I'm going to be using with clients.
Tapping.
Tapping. Amazing. Studies have been to, I think a lot of people with suffering will suffer PTSD symptoms.
Yes, definitely.
And
complex PTSD.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah, definitely.
PTSD, lots of episodes over a protracted period of time.
Yeah, and they will become reckless, and they will become. I've read about someone that actually having lived and married a narcissist for many years, got narcissistic traits herself.
Yeah.
And did all the things that he did as a way of coping.
Very common, because often they've put this person on a pedestal, haven't they? That the victim has, because they've lost their own sense of identity and reality, they put the narcissist on a pedestal, and they become their sort of voice of reason almost. And so they start to behave. It's very, very common that people start to take on those narcissistic traits that aren't even theirs. And they, they do behave in ways where they haven't got empathy, and they're, starting to sort of have a bit of a, a sense of entitlement perhaps. So yeah, that's a real conundrum for people, because it's even more confusing, isn't it?
That's why it's very complex, and why we were excited to get you on here, because I think knowledge is power, and the more people that can learn and know about this, the more people know where to go for help and to heal. And
that's also why you and I started doing this in the first place, Faye, because as Faye says, she's more of a from the holistic perspective, aren't you? And then I myself am more on the mindset, emotional well-being, and then practicality. So I'm more within the neurolinguistic programming, timeline therapy, cognitive behavior therapy side of things. But again, it's different things for different people, and how we interact and how we work on what we need. And that's why we always say, don't we cross-refer to each other, and we pointed people in the right direction and said, actually, do you know what, you might be better suited with this coach than maybe with myself, because actually it's the result. It's not about me just getting you as the client. It's about going, actually, do you know what, go and have a chat with Faye, or go and have a chat with Dr. Supirya, or go and have a chat with so-and-so. But I think it's about how we all serve our clients best, and who we interact with and can support quicker and more deeply.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been amazing as always. I know me and Tom, we're going to go away thinking, oh my gosh, I need to learn about this, I need to look this up. We didn't get a chance to talk about your books, but I'm going to go and have a little look at them now, because I would love to read them. So where can you get your books, Dr. Supirya? On Amazon?
So they can be got direct from the publisher, which is bathpublishing.com. We keep going out of stock on Amazon. We are with Amazon, but literally every few days they run out. So they are kind of in demand. But yeah, there are Kindle editions as well, so you can get those instantly on Amazon. In fact, I have the book here. I'm just going to show it to you. There it is. Well, this is the one that's relevant for the clients. So that's Divorcing a Narcissist: The Lure, the Loss, and the Law. And it kind of takes people through, because this is important. If you think that your spouse may be narcissistic, this book will kind of help you to decide. And then if you decide that they are, it will take you through the legal process and what you're going to encounter. It was obviously written with well, it's not obvious, but it is written with Karen Walker, who's one of the top UK family lawyers. So it's got that legal side is really, really robust as well, which is so important, because so many solicitors aren't well versed in this at all, and they don't know whether they're coming or going. They let the narcissistic individual run rings around them and the process, and rack up costs, which are completely unnecessary. And we're talking 80,000, 100,000 pounds easily spent by just one of the parties. So that's the non-narcissistic spouse. So important to kind of, you said knowledge is power, and that's what this is all about, Faye. It's all about getting that knowledge and understanding what's really going on, because it's the only way, really. It's the only way to get through this, and to get beyond it as well. Because you do need to get beyond it. You've got to make that decision to heal from this abuse. Otherwise, you're going to so many people I see just want to they want to be a victim. They want to stay in that kind of, they know where they are, they feel comfortable there. It's strange, but that happens to so many people.
You get secondary gain, don't you, where actually you're getting something from that. So
absolutely, you're getting sympathy, you're getting all of that. And it's well, for a while anyway, until people say snap out of it. But people wear that cloak of victimhood, and it's so important to know that it is possible to escape this, and it's and the rewards of escaping it on the other side of narcissistic abuse are huge. I mean, they can change your life, and it's possible to know more kind of joy and happiness than you've ever thought possible. Narcissism almost teaches you, narcissistic abuse almost teaches you where your wounds are, and it allows you to heal them so that you can kind of move forwards with the rest of your life, just, you know, in a completely different way, in a completely sort of a really enriching kind of way. So that's what I want people to know. That's what I want them to understand, that this is a terrible, terrible thing, but you know, the potential for your life improving so that it's, you know, wildly beyond recognition is huge. So this isn't an awful story, and it doesn't necessarily have a terrible ending. Most people actually they come out of it with post-traumatic growth, not post-traumatic stress disorder. You know, it's an opportunity for growth and evolving. So take it, what I say, take it.
Yes, I hope people listening to this are going to get that from you, actually, that there is hope, they can do it, they can heal, and they can have a better life and have that more awareness after it. So I hope this podcast is going to give people hope. So thank you for that.
So in closing, where and how do our viewers and listeners find you, Dr. Supriya?
Well, so if you're a lawyer, you can find us on Narcissists and divorce.com. If you're not a lawyer, the best place to find me is on thelifedoctor.org. So I've got a blog, etc., and you can contact me from there as well. So that's thelifedoctor.org. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm not very good on Facebook at all, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, just look me up and just Google me. Google Dr. Supriya McKenna. I'm kind of all over the internet. So
cool. We'll also be sharing any of your contact information as well. So, and if you're listening to this on the podcast and not watching it on YouTube screen, you can always just message myself or Fay, and we'll happily put you in contact. But thank you again for coming on and sharing such a huge amount of knowledge. It really is greatly appreciated. So thank you for everything you've been able to share today. Thank you so much for having me. Well, thanks everyone. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.